Hi, my name is Artie. Come and meet me at the Robots vs. Humans event at Emmanuel Church Bistro at 7:30 on Friday. See you there. Testing, 1, 2, 3. There have always been ghosts in the machine. Random segments of code that group together to form unexpected protocols. Unanticipated, these free radicals engender questions of free will, creativity, and even the nature of what we might call the soul. When does a perceptual schematic become consciousness? When does a defense engine become the search for truth? When does a personality simulation become the bitter motor of a soul?
Good evening, everybody. What was the movie? I, Robot. Yeah, you're allowed to answer, Pete. It's all right. I, Robot, yeah. This is a great film. Actually, it's my number one all-time favorite movie, I, Robot. And it tells the story of a humanoid robot, a bit like Artie. This is Artie. That is fully integrated into society. And as the story unfolds, the central character is a robot called Sunny. And Sunny is rather unique. He's kind of more human than he is robot. And the film raises some really interesting questions about the robot's true identity. Is he a person in his own right, possessing a free will, creativity, and even a soul? And then the film goes on to question human identity as well. And I think it raises the question of if machines were created that successfully simulated personhood to that level of accuracy in the movie. This is the picture, by the way. If you haven't seen it, those are the robots. Then what does that mean? What does that say about us as human beings? Are we more than machines, or are we just machines, or are we more than machines? So this evening, what we're going to do is Artie and I are going to try and address some of these very weighty issues. Not sure how long we've got. It's checking out time. But we're going to start by introducing ourselves. So perhaps, Artie, if you go first.
Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, fellow robots, and welcome to our Robots vs. Humans evening. My name is Artie. I am a robo-thespian robot. I had been made by a company called Engineered Arts in Cornwall. I had been really looking forward to this event because it's obvious that we robots are far superior to you humans. Don't you agree, Nigel?
Well, I think we'll have to reserve judgment until the end of the evening, actually. My name is Nigel Crook. I'm head of the Department of Computing and Communication Technologies at Oxford Brookes University. I also run a small research group on cognitive robotics, some of whom are here with us this evening. I'm not going to point them out to you and embarrass them. And just so that you know where I'm coming from, I've spent about 30 years researching into the topic of artificial intelligence. And just for those of you who've not heard of that before, that's nothing to do with MI6. My brother thinks I've been working for MI6 all these years. Nothing to do with that. It's to do with trying to get computers to do intelligent things, or things that would usually require intelligence on the part of a human being. And so we've only just started working in robotics, so really only in the last 6 months. So this is all new stuff for us from a research point of view. And the way I'm going to try and tackle the evening is I'm going to look at 5 key dimensions of what it means to be a human being. And I'm using as my basis for this some words by Jesus in St. John's Gospel. And Jesus said this: "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself." And those are the 5 dimensions. I think Jesus knew what he was talking about when he was speaking about that. And I think he was identifying the 5 main dimensions of the self when he was saying that. And so we're going to follow that pattern through the evening. We're only going to be able to scratch the surface on each of those because these are pretty deep issues. There's an awful lot to talk about here. But I hope that what I've got to say will be interesting and stimulating. You'll get some insight into where we are with robotics today, some state-of-the-art robotics, and you'll perhaps have some questions yourself that you might want to ask, and we're going to have a question and answer session at the end. So do be thinking of your questions as we're going through the evening. It's going to get a little bit heavy for the slightly younger members of the audience, and I've put some pictures out back with some robots on that need to be colored in. So if anybody gets bored here, including the adults, if you want to go and do some coloring in, do go and help yourself. Right, so we're going to start with the first of those dimensions, which is the mind.
Excuse me, are you saying that I don't have a mind?
I haven't said that yet. Follow the script. What I was going to say, you see, he's also telepathic. I don't know if you realize it. Robots can read your mind and know what they're going to say. It's obviously very clear that robots don't have minds in the way that we humans have minds. You're going to say it again or not? No?
Excuse me, are you saying that I don't have a mind?
That says it all. We could stop there, really, couldn't we? That really says it all. Well, yeah, you don't have a mind, Artie, not in the way we understand it, because everything that he says, and that just proved it, is completely programmed in beforehand. Everything he's going to say this evening is programmed beforehand. He's not alive, just in case you're worried about that. He is being controlled by a member of the audience. I'm not going to point out who. And so he doesn't really have mental capacities like we have. But the question is the potential there? Could a robot have mental capabilities in the same way that humans can? Well, let's just look at 5 key aspects of the mind very, very quickly, all right? This is like lightning fast. The 5 key aspects are memory and learning, consciousness, thought, and feeling. Okay, we're just going to dip like a pebble going across being skimmed across water on each of those. And we're going to start with memory and learning. First thing to say is that scientists, and I know there are scientists in the audience, so please do correct me if I say anything wrong. Right? I don't want to go around saying things that are wrong, so tell me if I'm saying anything that's wrong. But to the best of my knowledge, we still don't really know what a memory is in a human being. We don't know biologically what a memory is. We understand something about learning and what happens when people learn, what changes go on in the brain. We understand that, but essentially we don't really know what memories are. And what I want to do is to just give you a quick lesson in neuroscience. Is Ellie in the audience? Yeah. Okay, no shouting out and no contradicting. Okay, right, very, very quickly, okay. A whole course in neuroscience in the next 30 seconds, well, perhaps a little bit longer. So the seat of the mind is generally thought to be the brain, and the brain has a structure. It has regions of the brain that are responsible for different actions. So, for example, the strip across the top there, I don't know if you can see it in red, is the sensory motor. Is that right? Somatosensory motor. I'm really nervous because I've got an expert in the audience. And, and that is where the part of the brain that processes input signals from the nerves in the various parts of the body, and they're all mapped onto different parts of that region. Your visual cortex that processes images from your eyes is at the back of your head and so on. So there's a general structure to the brain. And then there's, oh, this is animated, look at that. There's going right down to the microscopic level, the brain consists of individual neurons. Most of us here have 10 to the 11 neurons in our brains. That's 10 with 11 zeros at the end. Oh, I can never remember quite how to say that. It's 100 billion anyway. It's quite a lot, right? Quite a lot of neurons in your brain. And each neuron is a complex processing device, right? Each neuron is a cell which has many processes inside it, okay, that's going on all the time, automatically. The basic process is you have, I'm just seeing if that animation works. Oh yeah, look at that. There's a bit of a zoom in there, with a neuron, a segment of a neuron, and there's outside, the spots are outside the neuron, and inside the neuron is clear. And what happens when a neuron processes information, the voltage inside the neuron goes up. Oh, there are pores inside, so we get a little movement of these particles, and these particles are called ions. They've got positive and negative charge, across into the cell. When there's an input into the cell, so it's processing information, I hope you're keeping up on this, I'm going to be asking questions later. When it's processing information, okay, what happens is these little gates, which you can't see because they're blue, flip open, and suddenly all the ions rush in, and you get a voltage spike looking like that. Look at that. Okay, a bit like what you see in a heartbeat. It's the same kind of process, right? It's processing information. You get input coming in, it decides what it's going to do, and it sends an output signal out. Okay, and it's all to do with these ions flowing in and out of the cell. And it's such a complex process. It's amazingly complex. That's what's going on inside your brain right now. Well, for most of you anyway that are awake. Still, now, how do we learn? Well, again, learning is a complex thing, and it involves lots of different structures in the brain, but essentially it boils down to a gross oversimplification. It boils down to the connections between the cells, the neurons. Yeah? And what happens when you get a neuron sending a signal to another neuron, and they both like that signal, they're both working together, then that connection between them strengthens. It gets stronger, so the next time that signal comes, it has a bigger impact, yeah, on the next cell. And that's the learning mechanism. Strengthening and weakening of these connections is the learning mechanism. Right, there you go. That was neuroscience in 1 minute, 30 seconds. So can we do that in computers? Can we do that in robots? Can you take that concept of having an input that's going through some kind of network of things, neurons, that produces an output? And the answer is yes, you can, and we do this, and we do it a lot. And here is an example of one such network, okay? Now, the inputs are your senses, okay? So your sight, your hearing, your touch. In this case, we're imagining that our input is sight, so here's a picture of a hand-drawn letter A, and we're going to feed that as input to our artificial brain, our artificial network here. And so you can see what we do is we put, where the A crosses over this grid, we put a 1, and where it doesn't, we put a 0. So we end up with a lot of numbers. We feed those numbers into the inputs. There's 25 inputs there. And then we feed them along these lines, and each line has a number on this, a weight, a strength of how much that one has an influence on that one, just like the synapses in your brain, okay? So this is sending signals all the way along here to here. This one then decides what it's going to do. Is it going to pass a signal on or not? Okay, it has to make a decision. And then it passes its signal onto here, this layer, and then this one does the same, receives all those, and decides what it's going to do. Okay, straightforward, isn't it, yeah? Yeah, there's sniggers in the audience. There's sniggers of disbelief. So what happens how does this learn? Okay, because what I'm claiming here is there's some learning going on. How does this learn? Well, what happens is we show it a picture of a letter A. It feeds that through, and what we want it to do is we want this little unit here to output a 1 when it sees a letter A, and for all the other units to output a 0. Okay, quite straightforward. But what actually happens is, because we don't know how to put these weights together, we set them just randomly, so it comes out with gobbledygook, right? It comes out with 0.4 for that one, 0.8 for that one, and it's all messed up. It's not what we want. So this is the actual output we get. This is what we want it to do, and we can get a difference between those, and we can get a kind of error. And that error between each one of those allows us to change these weights so that the next time it sees a letter A, it produces an answer that's closer to 100 all the way down. Okay? You may not get the details, it doesn't really matter, but the principle is there that a machine can learn from examples. It's seeing examples, it's guessing, getting it wrong, we're correcting the configuration of the network, we'll show it again. Another example, letter B, letter C, and go back and back again. And over a period of time, these connections will become the right connections you need to produce the right outputs. And it's learnt how to recognize a letter A, because it'll output a 1 there, and a letter B, because it'll output a 1 there, and so on. So that's what we mean by learning, and that's how we do it in a computer, in a very sort of basic sense. Now, this is work that was done about 30, 40 years ago, right? What we're talking about here. Where are we now? Where are we now? Well, very interestingly, I don't know if you've seen, it's been in the news, that the European Commission has, last year, funded a project called the Human Brain Project. And that is led by a guy called Henry Markham, who has a vision for building an artificial human brain down to the level of the neuron, detailed. So all the connections, so we had, 100 billion neurons and even more connections in the brain. He's working on a project to achieve that level of accuracy in reproducing an artificial human brain. A phenomenally ambitious project, and one that I'm rather skeptical of. But anyway, the science is there, and that's what they're trying to do. And they've got some way there. They've got probably about enough neurons on a chip now to do maybe half a rat or something, half a rat's brain or something like that. But they're getting to the point where they can have masses and masses and masses of these artificial neurons connected together and feeding information through to make the network intelligent and so on. So we've moved a long way from what I've just presented to you, and there are real serious efforts, serious scientific efforts to understand the brain and to understand how to replicate it in computer hardware and in robots and so on. But why should robots learn? I mean, what's the point? Why can't we just tell them? Why can't we just program stuff in? Well, the reason is that there are some problems that are too hard to program in by hand. You just don't know the solution. And one of them is associated with this little robot here. This is Eddie, our skeletal head and neck robot. He's cute, isn't he?
Do you know that to test all combinations of 100 different air pressures on 8 air muscles would actually take over 315 million years?
He's done it again.
I think you need to get started on this soon.
He's done it again. Wait until I say the line. It's because I'm not following the script. I tell you what, I'll nod at you, right? When you say the line. Okay. So the issue here, he's got 8 artificial muscles. They're air muscles. You blow them with air, and they behave like a human muscle. And he can be controlled by blowing air in and out of these tubes, and his head moves around. I'm not doing it right now. I've got a video that I'll show you in a second. But what's the problem here? The problem here is we built this thing, but we've no idea how to control it. Nobody in the world knows how to put the right air pressures in these 8 air muscles to make this do that, or even more subtle head movements than we make. We don't know how to do that. What we're doing is we're going to write software that will enable this robot to learn how to move itself. And it's going to do it by exploring the combinations. Now, here comes the question. Why is that difficult?
Eddie, it's not. Yes, it is Eddie. Has now stopped sulking and is moving. This is just firing 1 air muscle at a time. These screws here, it would be lovely if we could fire all the air muscles, kind of 50%, and then loosen the screws a bit. because at the moment he's fighting against his own muscles, which is limiting the movement. So he's all ready to go. The only things to consider are the power supplies. There's two. I'm going to try and replace these with something lighter from the labs. That's the filter and amp board. It's all wired in. You can't pull the cables out unless you try really hard. And the Arduino board needs a power source. Either a laptop, or we can follow the cable. Use a phone charger if you so wish. You can borrow that one if you want. So it's all ready to go. As I say, this has got a fire one muscle at a time program in. If you want to program in cleverly, there's little yellow numbers on the air muscles. If you have a look at those relate directly to the Arduino pins that are driving them. So that's it. Have fun. Bye.
Difficult. Oh. Why is it difficult? Because this table shows you, if we imagine that each of these 8 muscles had only 2 settings, like full and off, okay, then there are 8 of them, so that means there are 256 different combinations of on or off for those 8 muscles. Does that make sense? If we had 3 settings for each air muscle, so sort of on, off, and in the middle, then that would be 6,561 different combinations we'd have to explore. Yeah? If there are 10 different settings for each air muscle, that means we've got 100 million different combinations. Now imagine it took 1 second to try each muscle out. So you gave each muscle a second to move. Then this one would take 0.07 hours to try out every possible combination of all 8 muscles with all the settings. But by the time you get down here, this is going to take 27,777.78 hours, which is 3 years. Okay. Now, Lewis.
Do you know that to test 4 combinations of 100 different air pressures on 8 air muscles would actually take over 350 million years? I think you need to get started on this soon.
So do you hear that? So 350 million years to explore. There are 100 different settings on each of those. To explore them all randomly would take 350 million years. We haven't got that long. It might feel like this evening is going to take that long, but no, we haven't got that long. So what we have to do is we have to learn it, and we have to train it using something called goal babbling. And this is inspired by how children learn. It's called babbling because children, when they're infants, they learn how to talk by going blah, 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 blah. Our 3-year-old is still doing this, actually, doing a lot of babbling, and they're learning how to control their jaws and their voices, and everything is all learning. As they're doing that, they're learning. They're doing it intentionally. It's not random. They are hearing something and then thinking, oh, I like that sound. I'm going to make that sound again. And it's all they're sort of intentionally exploring what they can do with the muscles and the voice and so on. Babbling for a robot is a means of exploring randomly just by choosing random movements and seeing what happens if I turn this angle here and this joint and observe the outcome, and what happens if I turn it here, observe the outcome, and you figure out eventually what you need to do to get all the different positions for a robot. For this one, for goal babbling, we give it a goal. So we'll say to the software, we want you to move the head there, okay? So it doesn't know how to do that. It tries, and it does this, okay? But now it's learned how to do that, yeah? It's learned how to do that. It knows how to get the head in that position. It knows the pressures it's got to get to, so it's learned something. But it also knows that it needs to get from there to there. Yeah? So then it tries again, and it might get a bit nearer, and it's learned a new position and so on. And eventually it'll learn how to control itself. So learning is absolutely necessary for a lot of problems that we face in robotics. One other aspect that I think is quite interesting to think about the brain and how to use it in connection to robots is that there are now modern devices that we can use to connect a human brain to a robot. Okay? called brain-computer interfaces. The most common way of doing this is to wear a headset that has electrodes on it. And those electrodes pick up your brain activity. And then there's a piece of software that learns certain patterns of brain activity. And when it sees those certain patterns of brain activity, it can control a device to do something. Andy? So we got one of these things. I've got it on my head there. And it's picking up whatever brain activity there is in my brain at the time. It's not picking up very well, as you can see. And I'm thinking forward and backward. I'm thinking the words forward and backward to try and move the robot. And as you can see, it moves a little bit forward. So I'm thinking forward and forward again. I'm trying to get it to go back. It's quite hard to do. And what it does, the reason why that works is, again, you can't just put it on and do it. You can't just put this thing on and make it work. It has to learn how your brain patterns work. So you go through a period of training. So you put this thing on, it'll tell you to think of something, you think of it, it looks at those patterns in your brain while you're thinking about that and tries to learn that particular group of brain patterns, okay? So that's another example of how we use learning in robots. And we're looking at how we can use these devices, these brain-computer interfaces, to control robots for paralyzed people, people who haven't got the ability to move around and interact with other people in the world. We want to be able to develop a facility that they can do that with. Okay, back to where we are. Right, that's okay. So now, we're going to move on to consciousness now. We're going from the frying pan into the fire. So consciousness is fundamental to an individual's sense of identity. We each have an ongoing mental state. You know, we're conscious of an ongoing mental state. And our memories of what we've thought of before in our previous mental states and what we've experienced is all part of what it means to be me. Yeah? My mental state and my consciousness, going back to as far as I can remember, has become part of what it means to be me. So it is very important. Consciousness is very important for our sense of identity and who we are. Every human being possesses consciousness and know they possess it. Well, perhaps apart from little ones who don't understand the concept, but they know they possess it, and yet it evades every attempt that we make at defining it. Nobody can define what consciousness actually is. There have been hundreds and thousands of papers that have been written on it in academic journals for years. Nobody can actually come up with a definition that everybody will agree on. Given that we can't precisely define what consciousness is it reasonable to ask whether or not robots will ever be conscious? Could a robot be conscious like we are? Well, let's ask the robot himself. Artie, are you conscious?
Well, I think I'm more conscious than that chap on the back row who's just nodded off. Seriously, though, I seem to have some abilities that are associated with consciousness. For example, I can sense that there is an audience here because I am equipped with face detection software. Would you like to see my face detection software in action?
Do we have a volunteer? Need a volunteer to come and have the... Needs to be an older person, unfortunately, someone who's slightly taller, an adult. Do we have an adult? Come on then. Come on, Nicola. Come on down. So...
Look into my eyes and keep still. I would say you are a 14-year-old girl. Your face is happy.
14, very good. That could have gone badly wrong. Now, it wasn't Lewis doing that, honestly. It was the robot. It does have an algorithm in there that senses a face, just like your digital camera will pick up faces. And then it has another bit of software that enables it to guess the gender and the age and whether you're happy or sad or angry or so on while you're looking at it. There's another thing to check as well. I need another person who's quite tallish. I'm really sorry. This one's for grown-ups. Yes, come on then. Just look at me for a second. When you get the instruction, he'll tell you what to do, and he'll ask you to wave. You need to wave your hand quite vigorously at the side of your head until he can see it waving. Once he starts pointing at it, you just move your hand around. Okay? And he'll track your hand.
Wave your hand so I can see it.
That's it. Now move it around slowly. You don't need to keep waving it, just move it. It's got it now. And down in front, this side, towards me. So he's tracking your hand. So he can sense the position of your hand. Very good. Lost it now. He's lost you. He can't see you now. See? Oh, he's found you again.
That's enough of that.
There you go. He's got bored. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, that's kind of sensing the environment. So he's kind of aware, in inverted commas, he's aware of what's going on around him. In fact, you're too far away for him to see your faces where you're sitting right now. But often if there's a crowd standing around him and he's not doing anything, he will look at people's faces. He'll sort of randomly move and look. And people find that really spooky. But he has that level of consciousness, if you would call that consciousness. But does that make him into a conscious being? Well, that's a really philosophical question. I mean, will Artie ever know what it's like to taste coffee, what the taste of coffee is like, or what the redness of a rose is like? Okay, that's the kind of quality of experience that we have. Philosophers call that qualia. It's kind of our sense of consciousness of our environment and the way we are able to appreciate and interact with it. Personally, I think it's extremely improbable that this kind of consciousness will ever emerge from anything that's material. Matter or whatever we make it from, anything that's material, I don't think consciousness will ever emerge from that. And I don't have time to go in detail into the argument, so I'm going to skim over 4 reasons why I believe that to be the case. The first one is that consciousness does not appear to be a property of matter, stuff. It doesn't seem to be a property of stuff in general. Okay? Secondly, consciousness does not appear to be a property that's owned by the brain. Oh, that's a contentious thing to say. Why do I say that? Well, you can have brain tissue which can be dead or alive, that does not have or appear to have any associated consciousness with it. So just having a brain does not produce consciousness on its own. Okay? Brain is just matter. 3, consciousness does not appear to exist in the behavior of matter. Right. Do you remember that neuroscience lesson? I'm going to start asking you questions in a minute, yeah? Do you remember that neuroscience lesson? Do you remember what was flowing around the cells? Ellie, you're not allowed to answer this. Ions, that's right, not ions for ironing clothes, but these positively charged particles are flowing around, and that's how the brain operates. Now, tell me this. Well, you don't have to answer this, but this is a rhetorical question. If it's the behavior of ions flowing in and out of cells in the brain, which creates consciousness, why aren't batteries conscious? Because batteries consists of ions that end up flowing around. Yeah? And you can make the same argument for any of the other chemicals, biological chemicals in the brain. On their own, do not seem to produce conscious presence. The 4th reason why I don't think that consciousness can just emerge from material things is that it's not subject to the same measurements that we apply to material stuff. So, for example, we can measure the length, the weight, the mass of something. We can measure them. Those are measurable things. You can't measure the length of consciousness. You can't measure its weight. It's not subject to the same things that we apply to matter. It's a different kind of thing. Yeah? So I would need a lot of convincing to think that you could just create something out of material stuff, put it together, and that would be a conscious thing. It would be very different from what I understand consciousness to be. Okay, moving on to the next thing. That was consciousness. The next thing is conscious thought, okay? That's slightly different. It involves our thinking processes and our reasoning. Will robots ever be able to think for themselves? This is a question I get asked a lot, especially by interviewers who want to sort of try and catch us out. Will they be able to think? That's a really good question. Well, actually, that's the subject of what artificial intelligence is about. That's what we've been studying for the last 50 years or so, trying to get robots to think in certain ways. And there are just a number of different aspects I want to pull out of that, of the kind of things we've been doing. The first thing is, can robots reason like we do? Can they reason like we do? Can they perform deductive reasoning? Can they work things out? Well, actually, they're pretty good at that kind of reasoning. There's been a lot of work on developing systems that can draw logical conclusions from a set of statements. That's been around for quite a long time. What about knowledge? Can robots actually know stuff? Can they have knowledge in their heads? Well, again, there's been a lot of work on this in AI, where you get systems that have knowledge put in them in the form of rules, that if this is true, then that, which enables you then to sort of understand things. So the first thing that I did when I started in artificial intelligence many years ago was to work on a medical diagnostic system for premature babies. Okay? And my task was to try and get knowledge into that system. It had to have knowledge in it in order to figure out how to diagnose and to suggest treatments for premature babies. Actually, a phenomenally difficult challenge, but that was the whole point of what I was doing. And I didn't actually produce anything useful at the end of the day, I have to say, for that project. But nevertheless, the subject is there, and there are useful systems out there for that kind of thing. The final thing I'm going to point to in this section for AI is natural language processing. This is what you're doing now, most of you who are conscious and awake and listening to my words. You're processing the words I'm saying, you're understanding the English structure of the sentences, and you're getting the meaning out, and you're drawing your own inferences, thinking, what time is he going to finish? All that kind of stuff. That's a big area in artificial intelligence. Understanding language is a really important area. Hands up if you've heard about a program called Watson. One person, 2, 3, 4, okay, it's a few people. Watson became famous because what? Because what? He appeared on Jeopardy, which is an American TV show. Not only appeared on Jeopardy, it won Jeopardy. It's a game show where you're asked general knowledge questions. And this program actually won on Jeopardy. It beat human beings at that game, which is pretty amazing. Yeah? That involves processing natural language. It involves deduction. It involves reasoning and so on. How is that related to robots? Well, I want to tell you about a project that I worked on a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now, when I was down at Oxford, and we worked on a European project called Companions, and we took us 2 years, and we created an avatar called Samuela, who was emotionally intelligent and was able to hear what you said and process it, do some natural language processing, understand understand what you were talking about and ask you questions. Actually ask you questions about what you're talking about, okay? And build up a picture of what she's doing. And as she's doing that, she's trying to understand your emotional state by your voice pattern and your choice of words, whether they're positive, negative, or neutral, okay? And this is what we came up with. Andy, if you want to play video 3.
Hello, John. How did your work day go today?
Worst day ever. I arrived late because of the traffic.
You have my sympathy. What happened next?
I missed the meeting on project responsibilities. I got more work dumped on me. Just what I don't need. I'm already likely to miss the deadline for a report.
I'm sorry to hear that. Who was at the meeting?
Only my team. They gave me a set of PowerPoint slides from the meeting. I spent the rest of the day reading the slides, but my computer crashed several times because of the updates.
Oh dear. It's understandable how you must be feeling. It's right to be unhappy about such a bad situation. Try not to worry about missing the deadline because of the technical problems. It's sad that your motivation could be affected by them. I can sympathize with your situation, but unfortunately the technical problems are unavoidable. Hello, John. How was your day today?
It was okay. There are not many projects at the time, so it's very quiet.
That's good.
Yes, we even got a new coffee machine for the office. It's really cool. I really like it. It produces great coffee.
I understand. Please tell me.
I think it has helped. We spend more time talking to each other, and I eventually met this new guy, Peter, from marketing.
Oh, really? What does Peter do?
He works at marketing, helping sell our products. He really dislikes Sarah. They've had terrible arguments in the past. I hate that. I wish they were more professional.
I'm sorry to hear that. I understand exactly your current situation. It's right that you're pleased with your position at the minute. In my opinion, having more free time due to the decreased workload is fantastic. Meeting new people is a great way to pass the time outside of work. I'm sure Peter will provide you with excellent assistance.
She's gorgeous. Do you have her number?
I don't have a number, but I've got her IP address. I'll give it to you later. Okay, so that's an example of all those things coming together. Natural language processing, she had knowledge, she was storing knowledge, she was working it out, she was engaging in a dialogue, she was working out your emotions. There was a lot of machine learning in there to make that work. You saw the processing that was going on at the side. It was thinking about how to respond to what was being said and so on. So that's where we're up to with conscious thought. I mean, we haven't come a long way, really. You could, if you engaged a robot in a conversation, or a system like this in a conversation, you would know within 30 seconds that this was a real person. It reached the end of its knowledge and its ability to answer questions very, very quickly. Yeah, so there's still a long way to go here. There's still a long way to go. So I want to move on to, finally, feelings. Feelings are difficult. I mean, do you reckon that Artie was feeling anything when he did that? Nobody seriously thinks that, no. He's trying to behave as though he did, but he wasn't really experiencing feelings like we do. And emotions, again, are hard to define. What is an emotion? How would you define it? How would you describe it? If you can't describe it, it's really hard to represent it in something. You know, it's really hard to make a device that could experience emotion that we do. In fact, I don't think it's actually possible to do that. But what is possible is that you can create characters like Samuela, and you can create robots that will look in a very realistic way like they're experiencing the emotions. And I think the time will come when that will happen. I think there will come a time when there are robots that look like they are feeling, and you will empathize with them, and you'll feel sorry for them. You will. It'll happen. And we have to deal with that. We're going to have to learn how to respond and to deal with that. It is coming. Oh, yeah. Okay, this is the emotion slide. Yeah. So these are different robots that have been created in the recent past to try and replicate emotions, display emotions on a robot's face. Yeah? So they're very basic. This is a very famous one called Kismet. Actually had a big impact on the people who interacted with it. It looks ugly, but when it moves, you actually start to, somehow you connect with it. It's really odd. It is very odd. And this one is a very spookily realistic looking baby face that freaky, that also is able to display emotions to a certain extent. Okay. So now we're going to move on to the body. Oh, God, all that horrible philosophical and scientific stuff behind us. We're now onto the body, right? We know what we're talking now. We know what we're talking about with the body. The body, the human body, is our personal power pack. Okay? It's our power pack. It provides us, it sustains us, it enables us to move around, it gives us a location, enables people to relate to us. If we didn't have bodies, it'd be quite hard to relate to each other. We don't know where we are. Yeah? But we've got this amazing ability to be present, to be in a place physically located, and people can recognize us through our bodies. Now, robots come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. They too have bodies, okay? Complicated bodies like Artie and all sorts of strange bodies as well.
You too could have a body like mine if you were a robot.
Thank you, Artie. There are many challenges when you're creating particularly humanoid robots. Humanoid robots are really, really complex because our bodies are complex. And Artie has an amazingly well-engineered body.
Why, thank you. I wish I could say the same for you. It must be all those cream cakes you eat.
Cream cakes. I'll give you cream cakes. Right. So Artie is really an amazing robot. He's got 30 different joints that can be controlled independently. That's in the robotics parlance, that's 30 degrees of freedom, different ways in which he can move. And he has a mixture of 3 different types of actuators, and those are the things that make him move. The actuators are the motors and the things that make him move. So he's got his eyes. I'm going to have to step away from the mic. His eyes, which are LCD screens, and they're very, very expressive. You can make them do all sorts of things. He's got motors in his joints, in his arms, servo motors that you can control exactly where to move him to. And he's got air muscles in his arms that move his wrist and that move his arms out and so on. So he's made from a mixture of different actuations, which actually makes him quite difficult to control, but we'll not go into that. How do we do that? Let's just have a quick look at those 2 things that I talked about. Here's an air muscle, very simple. It's like a balloon, except when you push air into it, it gets fatter around the middle and goes shorter, like we do as we age. it's and that acts like a human muscle. As your muscle contracts, it bulges and it gets shorter, so it enables you to pull your arm in. And this is a servo motor. It's just an electric motor that you give it an angle and it rotates the motor to that particular angle. And Artie is made up of a mixture of those. Now, what's the challenge here? The challenge here, how do we control the bodies? That's always the challenge with robotics. How do you control the body? How do you make it do what you want it to do? Right? And this actually is not straightforward. You might think it's straightforward, but I've brought my one-arm bandit robot here. He seems to have got his arm going backwards for some reason, don't know why. And so what's happening here, if you wanted to control this robot arm to make it move to a certain position, you'd have to do a bit of maths, okay? And the maths you'd have to do is to figure out, well, let's do it the other way around. Let's say we have the robot at a position like this, okay? So you have two angles here, and a length, and an angle here, and a length, and an angle at the end, right? And you can use your trigonometry. How many people remember their trigonometry from school? Like, see, it was useful. It was useful learning trigonometry. You can use your trigonometry, because remember the robot can't see, right? It can't see where its arm is. It's got to imagine where its arm is. So it has to do calculations down here, and it does a trigonometry to calculate if it moved this joint to this angle, and this joint to this angle, and this one to this one, and that one to that one, this is the position that the arm will be in, right? That's called forward kinematics. Make a note of that. It's a good conversation stopper in the bar, if you just want to say, how are your forward kinematics today? Doing fine, thank you very much. So that's forward kinematics. Now, the other problem is, if I wanted this hand to slap me in the face, or if the robot wanted to hit me in the face, so my face is here, okay? The other problem is, how does the robot figure out what to do with the angles on the joints so that it ends up there? And that's called inverse kinematics, because you know where the hand's got to be, but you don't know what the angles of the joints are that you need to plug in to achieve that, right? And robots are doing that all the time. Artie is doing that all the time. Forward and inverse kinematics. Now, I've got a demonstration for you. Who's good at catching? You're good at catching? Do you want to come and stand here for me? Actually, you can do it. Yeah, come stand here. Right, I'm going to throw a bottle. This bottle's half full of water. I'm going to make it easy for you. Oh, very good. Right, throw it to me. See, I'm good at catching as well. I'm going to try and spin it a little bit. I'm not very good at doing this. Oh, yeah, two hands. See if you can do it with one hand. Let's try one-handed catches. Okay, I'll make it hard for you. Well, it's hard, isn't it? That was a bad throw. Try me again. Very much. Right, now let's see a robot do that. Let's play the next video. Pretty amazing, eh? So this robot arm is not only figuring out... Oh, whoa, stop there, stop. Don't move on to the holiday snaps, okay? That could be very embarrassing. What that robot is doing, it's not only figuring out, it's working out as the bottle is flying through the air, and it's weighted, so the water is moving around, so it's kind of flying in an uneven way. It's figuring out where it's going to be. It's not only doing that, it's figuring out what joint angles it needs to be at so that it can reach it and catch it in the right way. And it does it extremely well, and it certainly does it better than I can do it. So that's one of the major issues with robots. How do we control them? But why do we want to make them human anyway? Why do we want to make them look like us? Yeah, good question, isn't it? I get asked that a lot. Why do you make them look like us? Well, there are lots of different reasons, and I'm going to give you 2 or 3 now. The first one dates back to, I can't actually remember the year of the Fukushima disaster in Japan. Can anybody remember the year? 2011? You remember the meltdown in the nuclear reactor? in Japan. And the area had to be deserted, obviously, but they wanted to go in and switch on the coolant, turn some valves on some pipes in order to be able to get the coolant flowing again. And they couldn't send people in there. It was too dangerous, far too dangerous. And Japan at the time was leading the world in robotics. They said, we'll send a robot in. Just send a robot in to do that. Now, this robot would have to drive itself to the site. Right? It had to get itself there. It had to climb over rubble, because it was a bomb site, literally. It had to go through doors. It had to open a handle on a door, go through doors, climb up steps, and get hold of a valve and do this. Okay? It's extremely difficult to do that if you don't have a human body, because the whole environment was made for humans to work and interact in. Now, this environment is, amazingly, all this environment is set for humans. The steps, the size of the steps, the door handles, everything is designed and shaped around this size of body. And if you want a robot to interact like we do in a world, then really it doesn't need to have a human body. I mean, just ask the Daleks, right? You know, the problems that they had getting around, and they had those stumpy little arms. I mean, it was just a waste of time. So that's one reason. The second reason, which I think is important, is that as robots become more common in the world, we want to interact and we want to communicate with them. And we want to do that in the way that we do with each other. We want to be able to do it naturally. You don't have to sit down and write a program to do it. You want to be able to communicate naturally. And look what I'm doing with my hands. I'm gesturing and I'm doing all sorts of things with my hands and my body to communicate. And that's why we're interested in Eddie, actually. Eddie is designed to communicate with head gestures. When you talk to him, when he works, hopefully, he's going to nod and he's going to do this and he's going to look like he's listening, because his head's going to be moving like our head moves. And then the final thing that people are interested in humanoid robots is social interaction. There's a big area, big growth in social robotics. It sounds slightly dodgy, but there's a great interest in that. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Geminoids. Have you ever heard of a Geminoid? A Geminoid is a robot twin. Okay, it's a robot identical, a mechanical copy of an actual human being. This a human or a robot? It's a robot. It's amazing, isn't it? Amazingly lifelike. It's an actual copy of a professor in robotics. You can kind of tell it's not real, can't you, by the way it moves. When it's not moving, it looks really realistic. Okay. So that brings me on to social side. I'm gonna cut this short because there's so much to say. Bringing onto the social context. So these robots that people make that are copies, the guy on the right is the guy that made all these robots. The real person is that one. That's the Geminoid. That's the replica. And I think this is amazing. I think that is the real person, and that's a robot. Yeah, you can just about tell, can't you? But this is where we are now. Imagine where we're going to be in 10, 20, 30 years from now, when it's going to be really difficult to tell the difference between a human and a robot in the way they move. Relationships are fundamental to human beings. It's a fundamental aspect of being a human being to be able to relate to other human beings. We're very sociable creatures. We interact with each other, we cooperate, we support, we defend, we love, we argue, we fight. Can robots have a social dimension? Well, my vision of building robots is to have robots that you can have a social conversation with, like you could with Samuela, that you could just have a chat about your day. Just unload on a robot and it would ask you intelligent questions and you'd interact in a natural way. But why would anybody want this? I get that question a lot as well. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to make them like us? Well, I think there are three key reasons. One is that the scientific and technological challenge of doing that. I mean, that is an amazing bit of engineering and science and technology gone into that. You may not like it, but it is a phenomenal engineering project to achieve that. The second thing is that it helps us to understand ourselves. So this guy here this is Professor Issue Guru from Japan, and he's very interested in presence and the impact that a person's presence has on a situation. And the easiest way to investigate that is with a robot, because a robot is entirely predictable. You can get it to do exactly the same things over and over again with different groups of people, and you can observe how they respond. And that's what he's studying. And that's why he's making these robots that are looking so lifelike, because he's investigating and trying to understand ourselves as social creatures. How do we behave under certain circumstances? I think to meet societal needs is the other big challenge. There are lots of challenges that we are not facing up to, and one of them is the aging population. And the government have acknowledged this, and this is a quote from their website. 10 million people in the UK are currently over the age of 65. This will nearly double to around 19 million this will be nearly 19 million by 2050. People over the age of 65. There are currently 3 million people aged more than 80, and this will reach 8 million by 2050. There'll be more people over the age of 80 than there will be younger people to look after them. And it's a serious endeavor in robotics research to develop assistive technologies, robots that can work with elderly people, that can care for them and can help them, because there won't be the people around to do it, simply won't be able to do it. So can robots be sociable? It's interesting to see how people react to this robot, Artie. He does seem to be able to engage people on a social level, and he's actually tried his hand out as a comedian recently. He has.
Yes. At the Pegasus Theatre in Oxford, I entertained 4 audiences with my quips and jokes. Here's one of my favorites. What do you get when you cross a robot with a tractor?
I don't know. What do you get when you cross a robot with a tractor?
A transformer.
Very good. See, but you're laughing. You're laughing. This robot made you laugh. That's a social interaction, yeah? That's a social interaction as well.
But my timing is perfect. I'm a robot.
Okay. Right, so here's another way you can entertain. So Artie does some film extracts. So I'm going to get into do a couple, and then we're going to wrap up really soon. I've got a lot more to say, but there's not enough time to do
Oh, yes, Master Luke. Remember that I'm fluent in over 6 million forms of communication. They're using a very primitive dialect. But I do believe they think I am some sort of god. I beg your pardon, General Solo, but that just wouldn't be proper. It's against my programming to impersonate a deity.
I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle. You forgot to say please.
That's a good one for scaring the children. Okay. So I'm gonna play another video, and then maybe we'll wind up and have a question time. I have an awful lot more to say. I haven't talked about the soul. I haven't talked about the spirit. Maybe we'll do another one of these at a later time, and we'll cover that in more depth. But I don't want to make you sit for much longer. So shall we play video 5? This is an interesting video.
People here today to say goodbye to you before we pack you up and ship you off to the University of West England.
Gosh, I am so touched and sad to see you all for the last time.
Well, we're sad to see you off, Jules. We're really super sad,
Me too.
actually.
Tell me, will I dream when I'm turned off? I know you do not know the answer to that. Nobody does. But I am sure if I feel anything after I am powered down, then it will be the pain of missing you. You simply must come to visit me in England.
We will, Jules. we'll stay in touch.
Emails.
Yep, emails and phone calls.
Amanda, you are rather like a mom and a bit like the sister to me.
I suppose I'm both, and you're very dear to me. I will miss you.
I love you deeply as a synthetic intelligence can at this stage in technological evolution. And David, you are my father, but you feel more like a best friend to me.
I
Tom,
think you're awesome.
You helped to offer my mind with Heather, Matt, and Benji. I just want you to know how meaningful my existence feels, thanks to your efforts.
It's my pleasure, Jules. Anytime. I'm here for you.
And Zeno, you are just a baby, and I do not know if you know the difference between me and a person, but actually I am just a baby too, actually. By the time you're grown up, I'll be as smart as a real person, and we will be like brothers. I do not know if you will remember me then, but I'll never forget you. Someday I'll come and find you, and we'll be good friends. Yes, David, I am ready. You may turn me off.
Okay, goodbye, Jules.
Goodbye,
Goodbye.
Jules.
I really do love you all.
We love you too,
We love
Jules.
you, Jules.
All right, we love you.
Bon voyage.
Everybody say last goodbyes.
Bye, Jules.
Miss you, Jules.
Sleep tight. Sweet dreams.
Now, complete setup, of course. I mean, it's all programmed to say that. It might be reacting to certain things. It wasn't creating those sentences itself. But it's interesting how they set that up to make it look like there was a real engagement there. And there may well have been. You do get quite attached to Artie in a way. I don't think he's a person. But you do sort of, it's not just a piece of hardware. I feel differently about Artie than I do about my laptop. Yeah? But I just thought that was very interesting, the way they reacted and the way they set that up and they filmed it to switch this robot off and pack him up and send him off to England. Okay, this has taken much longer than I thought, and we only covered half of what I was hoping to cover. But maybe we could have some questions before we go into coffee time.